our 5-minute presentations from each of the countries, from Colombia, Honduras, and Brazil. And now we look forward to hearing from Mr. Danny Glover, who's been a long-time activist in many of these issues facing the Pan-African community across the world. Please welcome Danny Glover.
I first want to thank Congressman Johnson and his staff and all those who are participants in organizing this very, very important discussion and around the state of African descendants in our hemisphere. As well as my job, role that I often play, and many roles that I play as an artist, I've always considered myself first a citizen. I happen to be the special I'm just finding the word right now. The special ambassador, goodwill ambassador for this decade of African descendants. I've been the special goodwill ambassador along with Marielle Fanon, who is the daughter of Frantz Fanon, and who had been the interlocutor as well. Let me throw some sort of way in which we kind of look at this particular moment. And as in this discussion, often I want to draw on two different dynamics. One, the dynamic that is expressed here from members of the communities, countries of Brazil, Colombia, also Honduras, that are represented here on this panel. But also something else that my great colleague and one friend often talks about is James Early, is about restorative political projects. If we look at this situation around of African descendants, over 200 million live in this hemisphere. The majority, as we all know, live in Brazil. The African Americans populations in the U.S. is roughly around 50 million people. And those are things that we know. The Caribbean, Colombia. But when I think about this moment, as I think about, I can identify each one of the countries that we've talked about, all of which I've visited within the last year, and on several occasions over the last 15 years. Certainly the one that I was familiar with, because my wife is from Brazil. My wife, Dr. Iliane Cavaleiro, is a professor of education. My wife worked in the first administration of Lula da Silva in the Ministry of Education, and she, along with other Afro-Brazilian women and men, but primarily women, always leads the way, brought significant changes within the way Black Afro-descendant children were educated. And that is particularly her field of study is educating Black Afro-Brazilian children. So in that case, in Brazil, I've had certainly the honor of visiting what I refer to as positive or restorative political projects, MST. The landless movement. The landless movement in Brazil has produced over 400,000 families onto vacant land, nearly 1.4 million people. 60% of those, my understanding, of African descent on land, most of those in the Northeast. And I'm saying this in the context that, remember, in fact, this hasn't been mentioned on this, we had two coups d'etats in this hemisphere within the last few years. The one in Honduras, which overthrew a democratically elected president in Honduras, and we had a coup d'etat against Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, woman who's president of Brazil. Well, no, that has not been mentioned on this panel right now when we talk about the issues in Brazil. We also know that the most popular democratic fighter for democracy in the region, in Brazil, is sitting in jail right now, Lula da Silva. Those are realities that exist right now. All of those instances, all three of those, in some ways, were in some ways supported or initiated by the U.S. government. Period. So we talk about political projects. Those restorative political projects. MST, I spoke about the education of Afrodescendants. I also been noted that in Brazil, that as noted by the UN, the Workers' Party, despite some of the conversations, the Workers' Party in Brazil, during this election, initiates some of the most far-reaching projects that ended the most extreme elements of poverty in the country that's well. So on one sense, the issues of, as we always say, the issues of Afro-descendants, which are well specific and might do take place within a much larger context of what is happening in the region and what is happening in the country itself. I say that from the vantage point that we know that there's been an attempt to destabilize throughout the region all these progressive, these from the ground up to democratic process that have been happening in Latin America, without a doubt. We see it in Brazil, we see it in Venezuela, we saw it in Ecuador, we see it at every point in time. We see the initiation of these examples of where these efforts are being just destabilized in these particular countries within the region. And where we found it exemplified, we saw that certainly the overthrow, or the coup d'etat or overthrow of a democratically elected president in Honduras. I had a chance to visit Honduras in last January and happened to go to the Guity-Guevara community, spend some time there in the Guity-Guevara community, was celebrated there, and saw the culture of the Guity-Guevara community, and understanding that community is under attack right now. That community is under attack because of the attempt to grab their land and to disenfranchise that community. Right as we speak right now. In fact, we could say that just in this month alone, 4 women who are leading the resistance in the Guity-Guevara community have been killed in September. 4 women, and that is information from Frank, the leading human rights organization in there. So these are dynamics that we have to understand. That I said this because I've visited Colombia as well. I was in Colombia in Cali about 2 years ago at a conference of young Afro-descendants. You know, we know as my brother has submitted that the citizens that have been majority citizens who have been internally displaced in Colombia have been African descendants without a doubt. In fact, as we speak now, African descendants, leaders, human rights leaders, and labor leaders are subject to be murdered at any time. So, I mean, there's the context in which we have to do. It is important for us to use this moment of the decade as a platform in which we not only look at all the indices when it comes to the fact that 90% of those Afro-descendants live in poverty, the fact around education, we've had around healthcare. In fact, upon Bolsonaro taking office, the first thing he did was remove 30,000 Cuban doctors who've been providing healthcare, health services to those people in Brazil who are most vulnerable. So at the same time, healthcare, economic development, and to see why at this particular moment we have this movement to the right, you know, this movement to the right in the region, in the same way that we have this movement to the right in our own country and other places in the world as well. So when we consider all these dynamics in a sense, and look at these we say, another political project that I happen to be very close to for the last nearly 15 years is the project of the Bolivarian Revolution. Now all you have to go to is the Barlavento on the seacoast, about 75 kilometers from Caracas, and see the implementation of what had happened there. Barlavento's Afrodescendant community, what we see there is development in that community unlike we see anywhere else. We see the integration of that community into the country's economic development, and at the same time, there's an attempt to destabilize that and to remove that as an image of possibilities. That's one of the things that we have. So we sit here and understand that yes, there are internal forces. Yes, that certainly these leaders have come to power who have orchestrated another narrative in terms of what development is, in terms of our responsibility as citizens as well. Our responsibility as citizens. So in looking at Barlavento, take for instance Barlavento, where you can see examples of the restoration process happening to these Afro-descendants here. But that's not the news we get into the general conversation that happens in the press. And so in the corporate press, we don't get that information. We see in the corporate press that the Bolivarian Revolution actually does these things in order as a payoff to those people to follow them, et cetera, not understanding that these are real development projects that in a sense are transforming their communities and providing another leverage, another opportunity for us to create a new narrative, not for just Latin Americans, but that example could resonate in other places in the world as well. So I think that there's this opportunity to talk about these things, and in a sense, in understanding that these, and that's the problem with 1 minute and 5 minutes, is not very much time to talk about 5 minutes, but I know that other people want to talk. But as I said, I have been, since the last 6 years now, almost nearly 6 years, the special Goodwill Ambassador for this decade. I've had an opportunity to talk to members of various communities, from Ecuador to Venezuela, to Argentina, to the wonderful experience that we had with Romero Rodriguez, with Muñoz Afro in Uruguay, and the work that they're doing, and the collaboration with the Uruguayan government in the work they do. Look at the work that's happening in Uruguay. Romero Rodriguez was one of the leading advocates and one of the leading forces in the Conference on Racism and Xenophobia in 2001 in Durban. But thank you very much.
Presentations. One of the things we discovered is how similar our experiences are throughout Central and South America in terms of Afro-Latinos. And so now we're going to open the floor for questions. Some of the issues that they discussed, the commonalities, is land displacement. And we know how important land is. And the rich and international interest, corporate interest, are many of the reasons that we have much of this land being taken. Educational issues was a theme that continued to come up. Violence against Afro-Latinos, as well as the destabilization of leadership and organizations were some of the themes that ran throughout all of these presentations. And so, with that being said, I would like to propose a question to the panelists, those who are interested in answering. I know some of you answered it in your presentation about the issues that you face in your country, but what can we do here in the United States to best assist you? And that question is multi-level. We mean individually, what can we do? Collectively, as members of the Pan-African community, what can we do? And you don't have to be black to help black folk. I always say all black folks aren't your friends, and all white folks aren't your enemies. There are people who are concerned about humanity. So collectively, as humanity, we have people who are in agencies, non-governmental agencies. We have people who work in government in this room. We have nonprofit organizations in this room. We have people who are a part of local organizations in this room. What can we do to help you so that your visit and your presentation in this day is not in vain, and that we can do something to advance your cause? I'm asking, please limit your answers to be brief. Please be brief, okay? Because we do want to open it up to questions to the floor. Please propose your answers. Thank you. Anyone, whoever wants to start.
Hay bienes y servicios que pertenecen a la humanidad. En el caso de Colombia, en el caso del Pacífico, donde está la población étnica, hay un fuerte componente ambiental y ese pertenece a la humanidad. Y en el caso particular, para proteger a los grupos étnicos en Colombia, es necesario exigir el cumplimiento del capítulo étnico del acuerdo de paz. Allí hay elementos de protección territorial, de protección poblacional, de garantía de participación, de acceso a los espacios de poder, pero sobre todo de aprovechamiento racional de los recursos naturales. Y el segundo elemento que es muy importante.
Okay. In the Pacific of Colombia, it's important to understand that what is there is an environment that belongs to humanity. So in order to protect humanity there, you have to protect the ethnic groups. The best way to do that is to enforce the ethnic chapters of the Peace Accord. In the ethnic chapter, you have elements of protection for the territory, protection for the people. You have guarantees for participation and consultation, and you also have pathways to access power in addition to sustainable use of the environment and resources.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you.
Yo creo que dos experiencias que han sido muy efectivas hoy para nosotros son, primero es el trabajo de incidencia política que hemos hecho en Estados Unidos, que ha permitido hacer transformaciones en Colombia, y eso ha permitido inclusive el envío de recursos económicos dirigidos específicamente a las comunidades étnicas.
So there are two experiences that have been very important and effective in helping our work. The first is that the political advocacy that we have done in the US has also enabled us to be able to transfer resources, economic resources, directly to the leaders in our communities.
Y ese esfuerzo y recursos vienen especialmente del Congreso. Y el segundo es cómo las comunidades organizadas pueden también liderar procesos que con la ayuda de ciudadanos y organizaciones, como en el caso nuestro, con el capítulo étnico, organizaciones de sociedad civil, ciudadanos, el Congreso y la misma administración del presidente Obama, fue posible que los grupos étnicos quedaran incluidos en el acuerdo. Yo creo que esas experiencias son importantes para que ustedes aprendan y podamos trabajar juntos.
Most of the resources I'm talking about are coming from the U.S. Congress. It's important that organized communities lead processes with citizens, organizations. The experience that we had with the ethnic chapter, where it was organizations, the Congress, even the Obama administration, that made it possible for us to be included in the final peace accord. I think that should be studied and see how we can replicate that.
Thank you, Mr. Cordova. So for Colombia, the recommendations are for us to advance the peace accord because it has so many elements to it, as well as getting assistance from Congress because their power could help the peace accord as well. Thank you, Colombia. Honduras, do you have any recommendations? Okay, thank you.
Es importante que tengamos también bien claro que los políticos afro no podemos ser enemigos de la sociedad civil, que juntos tenemos que trabajar en forma coordinada y como verdaderos aliados, teniendo siempre claro los objetivos por lo que vamos a hacer la alianza. Y para eso, además de la incidencia política, construir un proyecto político que nos permita accesar al poder es sumamente importante para que nuestro pueblo, nuestras comunidades se puedan desarrollar. Entonces, usted hacía la pregunta, ¿qué podemos hacer como individuos y en forma colectiva? Pues lo que necesitamos es lograr que nuestros líderes de sociedad civil no nos vean a los 11 diputados afro en este momento como enemigos, sino que no, más bien nos vean como verdaderos aliados y que tenemos más cosas que nos unen que las cosas que nos separan, y que las fuerzas políticas, nosotros no formamos parte de la estructura de poder de los diferentes 6 partidos políticos de los cuales formamos parte, pero sí nuestro liderazgo les ha permitido a los partidos políticos incluirnos. Por lo tanto, tenemos que aprovechar ese espacio para que nosotros pudiéramos hacer incidencia en nuestras comunidades a través del Congreso Nacional. Eso básicamente es nuestro principal aporte. Y hay mucha apertura de parte de tanto del Congreso como del gobierno para eso. Gracias.
So it's important that and very clear that our Afro politicians aren't seen as the enemies. Together with our Afrodescendant leaders, we can work in a coordinated fashion as allies, as long as we have clear objectives of what that alliance is going to take us to. We can co-construct a project of political access to power. It's very important that our leaders don't see the 11 deputies as the enemies. We need to unify. There's more that unifies us than separate us. So we need to be able to use the space that we've been able to get in the Congress to advance our communities.
Quiero hacer algunas recomendaciones también. En la última slide de mi presentación tenía planteado algo que conversó Danny Glover, que tocó la parte política.
So in the final slide of my presentation, I had on there something that relates very much to what Danny Glover said about touching the political.
Y es que Honduras estamos viviendo una etapa de indefensión y creo que Estados Unidos puede hacer bastante para apoyar el retorno al Estado de Derecho que tenemos hay muchos problemas en las comunidades garífunas de desplazamiento precisamente porque hay un vacío, no hay donde denunciar y las denuncias no se pueden procesar en violación de derechos humanos.
So our country is in a defenseless state, and the U.S. can do a lot to basically return or strengthen rule of law in our country. Many of the problems that our Garifuna peoples face, like displacement and abuses, part of the issue is that they can't report, there's no one to report to, and no one to address it.
Por ejemplo, la última vez que fue atacado Vallecito, nosotros fuimos a donde fuimos a dar fue a la embajada de Estados Unidos para proteger a la defensora Miriam Miranda, que estaba siendo perseguida para asesinarla hace 2 semanas. Entonces creo que el Congreso, pero también individualmente los ciudadanos estadounidenses pueden dar ese apoyo para ayudar a proteger nuestra gente allá, porque no tenemos protección.
So the last attack that happened in Vallecito, we went directly to the U.S. Embassy to ask for help in protecting Miriam Miranda, our leader. She was under attack and was going to be assassinated. We think that the U.S. Congress and U.S. citizens can do a lot to work towards guaranteeing protection for our people.
Thank you very much to the representatives of Honduras. Clear objectives of what we want to accomplish so that we can indeed be focused on our efforts. Changing the image of Afro-Latino leaders so that they're not seen as the enemy. And then the rule of law. The U.S. can help make sure that people have protection and rights in their country. Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to Brazil. Alexandra?
It's very important to remember that we're going through all this turmoils in Brazil that we had in the last 10 years, a 54% augmentation of violence against women of color, while white women have experienced a 9% decrease in the same violence in the same period. It's important that we remember that LGBT people are being murdered, and this has to be called attention. There's also a strategy going on, as reminded by Mr. Glover, that are drawing out the resources of organization and human rights defenders in Brazil. We need to have this issue to be called attention to. We need to have help from the international agencies, and it's also very important that we recommend that the United States Congress recommend the ratification of the Inter-American Accord. I'm sorry, I just lost because of the Spanish and mixing the English. The Inter-American Convention, and also to include the article that talks about LGBT violence. I just want to say that I also make part of an Afro-American and Latin Caribbean network that's been created a little while ago called Red Latino Afro-LGBT Latino Americana y Caribeña, and we're making efforts to continue with political incidents on these issues. And I think it's important that we have from not only the government but also the North American organizations attention, resources, and networking to continue to do our work and to continue denouncing what's going on in our countries.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. Douglas?
Sim, bem objetivamente, que pedir aos nossos parlamentares, congressistas aliados, que questionem o acordo